September 17th, 2012, 2:15 p.m. Piedras Negras, Mexico. A guard glances at his watch. 45 minutes remain until the shift change. He is one of 12 guards for 734 prisoners. He knows something is wrong. He's known for months. But he also knows that asking questions is the quickest way to end up in a diesel drum. On the other side of the wall, 2 buses are parked in a vacant lot. The drivers don't turn off their engines. They won't have to wait long. Inside the prison, 131 men begin to move. They don't run. They don't hide. They walk. Some pass through the carpentry workshop towards a 7-meter tunnel. Others simply walk to the main gate. The guards watch. No one whistles. No one shoots. No one does anything. 15 minutes later, 131 prisoners disappeared. The alarm would only be triggered an hour later. This is not a prison break story. This is the story of a prison that was never a prison. A Mexican government facility that, for 3 years, served as headquarters, weapons factory, torture center, and crematorium for the most violent cartel Mexico has ever seen. The Zetas. And the most disturbing thing, the government knew. To understand Piedras Negras, you need to understand who Los Zetas were. Osiel Cardenas Guillen has just taken control of the Gulf Cartel after a bloody internal war. He has a problem. His rivals want to kill him. The Mexican army wants to arrest him. He needs protection. Cardenas is looking for an army lieutenant named Arturo Guzman de Cena. He asks him where he can find the best soldiers in Mexico. The answer, GAEF, Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, the elite of the Mexican Special Forces. These men were no ordinary soldiers. They had been trained at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, by the U.S. Army's 7th Special Forces Group. They learned counterinsurgency tactics, urban combat, ambushes, intelligence gathering, interrogation, and the use of explosives. Some received additional training from the Israel Defense Forces. They were Mexico's answer to the Navy SEALs, created to fight the cartels. Guzman de Cena made a simple offer: desert and earn in 1 month what the army pays in a year. 31 men accepted. Los Zetas were born. The name came from Guzman de Cena's Z1 radio code, used by commanders of the federal police. The irony was brutal. The men trained by the United States to destroy the cartels became the deadliest cartel in Mexican history. In the following years, Los Zetas expanded their operations. They ceased to be just security guards. They became kidnappers, extortionists, drug traffickers, and assassins. When the Gulf Cartel was no longer useful, they simply took control. In February 2010, the separation became official. Los Zetas declared war on their former boss, and they needed territory. Coahuila, the state bordering Texas, was perfect. And in the heart of Coahuila, there was a prison that would be transformed into something the world had rarely seen. Cerezo Piedras Negras, Social Rehabilitation Center, a state prison less than 2 kilometers from the American border, directly across from the Texas town of Eagle Pass. In 2009, Los Zetas began the infiltration. The process was methodical. First, they identified vulnerable guards. In Mexico, a prison guard earns the equivalent of $300 a month. Los Zetas offered 3 options: silver, lead, or escape. Accept the bribe, get shot, or disappear with your family. Most people chose silver. In December 2009, a man known only as El Comandante Enano was appointed as the plaza boss inside the prison. He wasn't an employee, he was a Zeta, and from that moment on, he was in charge. The structure was military. Below the commander, there were lieutenants responsible for different operations. Below them, soldiers. The cartel hierarchy simply replaced the prison hierarchy. The official guards? They became mere extras. Some were co-opted. Others were threatened. Those who resisted disappeared. A guard who later testified described the situation. 2 or 3 times a year, authorities from Saltillo would come to visit. They knew about the situation. The visits went from the parking lot to the director's office and back to the parking lot. They rarely entered Cerezo. They were very quick visits. They didn't ask questions. They stood aside. And as on other occasions, nothing was done to change what was happening there. The National Human Rights Commission attempted to inspect the prison in 2011. They gave it a 0 rating, not because they found any problems, because they couldn't get in. The level of insecurity was so high that federal inspectors were prevented from crossing the gates of a state prison. Within its walls, the prison was transformed. The carpentry workshop, which was supposed to teach vocational skills to inmates, became an assembly line. Prisoners and outside workers produced fake military uniforms, camouflage pants, tactical shirts, holsters. In May 2012, the Mexican Navy raided a factory in Piedras Negras and found 225 vests, 151 pairs of camouflage pants, and 170 shirts. The factory was connected to the prison. Los Zetas used these uniforms to impersonate soldiers during operations. They kidnapped civilians at fake checkpoints. They broke into houses pretending to be authorities. Another area of the prison was converted into a mechanic's workshop. Vehicles were modified to create secret compartments, false panels, fuel tanks with double bottoms, seats with hidden cavities. Cars entered normally and left ready to transport cocaine, methamphetamine, and weapons across the border. The production of bulletproof vests also took place within the walls. The Zetas didn't trust outside suppliers. They manufactured their own protection. And then there were the VIP cells. Cartel leaders used the prison as a hideout. When the army or federal police intensified their searches, the bosses simply entered the prison. Who would search for a fugitive inside a penitentiary? Parties were held. Testimonies describe barbecues where whole oxen were slaughtered to feed the guests. Alcohol, drugs, prostitutes. Everything was available. The most senior Zetas didn't wear prison uniforms. They wore bulletproof vests and drove customized vehicles within the complex. They were, in effect, the true administrators. But the prison's darkest function was not manufacturing or hiding. It was extermination. Los Zetas had a logistical problem. They killed a lot of people. Rivals from the Gulf Cartel, informants, people who owed them money, witnesses, relatives of traitors. The bodies needed to disappear. Piedras Negras prison became the solution. The method was industrial. 200-liter drums, the same ones used to store oil or fuel, were filled with diesel. Bodies were dismembered, placed in the drums, and burned for hours. What remained was ash and bone fragments too small for identification. Investigators estimate that more than 150 people were murdered in this way inside the prison between 2009 and 2012. 150. In a Mexican government facility. Run by civil servants. Funded by taxes. The victims were not just rival criminals. Testimonies reveal that kidnapped civilians were brought to prison. Men, women, and children. In March 2011, Los Zetas discovered that 2 former members were collaborating with the American government. The response was the Allende Massacre. For 3 days, Zetas roamed the city of Allende and neighboring municipalities. The order was simple: kill anyone connected to the traitors. Relatives, friends, neighbors, acquaintances, anyone with the same last name. Estimates range from 60 to 300 victims. Many of the bodies were taken to Piedras Negras prison, burned in drums. Ashes thrown into the San Rodrigo River, which flows into the Rio Grande, the border with the United States. A prosecutor described it. We received information that this place was autonomously ruled by the Zetas. Kidnapped people were brought here, tortured, executed, and then they disappeared. The Zetas didn't hide their activities from the guards. On the contrary, some guards were forced to watch. It was a message: cooperate or be next. September 2012. The Zeta situation was changing. Heriberto Lascano, Zet3, the supreme leader of the cartel, was under pressure. The Sinaloa cartel, led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, was invading territories previously controlled by the Zetas. In the state of Tamaulipas, the war was open. The Zetas were losing men. Soldiers were being killed in clashes, captured in operations, and extradited to the United States. The cartel needed reinforcements. Omar Trevino Morales, Z42, controlled the Piedras Negras Plaza. His brother, Miguel Z40, was second in command of the entire cartel. The order came from above: recruit. Inside the prison, the message spread. All Zeta members would be transferred. but not to another prison, for the war. The problem, not all the prisoners were Zetas. Some were common criminals. Thieves, small-time drug dealers, murderers with no connection to organized crime. These were given a choice, join or stay. Staying wasn't really an option. Anyone who refused would be seen as a potential informant, and informants didn't last long in Piedras Negras. On the night of September 16th, the logistics were finalized. 2 buses were requisitioned, escape routes were planned, meeting points were established. Everything was coordinated by radio, using the Zetas' private communication network, which covered a large part of northern Mexico. The guards on duty the following day were informed. Do not interfere. Do not alert. Do nothing. The escape would not be an escape. It would be an evacuation. September 17th, 2012. Monday. Mexican Independence Day was still being celebrated. 14:15, the signal has been given. In the carpentry workshop, a group of prisoners approached a back wall. There, hidden behind some equipment, was the entrance to a tunnel. The tunnel was 7 meters long and 1 meter and 20 centimeters in diameter. It wasn't the work of a night. It had been excavated over weeks, possibly months. Reinforced walls, electrical cables for lighting, ropes to aid passage. The exit emerged next to Watchtower number 6 on the north side of the complex. From there, a wire fence was the last barrier. Some prisoners used the tunnel. They crawled through the 7 meters, emerged on the other side, cut the wire with pliers, and ran to the vacant lot where the buses were waiting. But most people didn't need the tunnel. They simply walked to the main gate. The guards opened the door. 131 men walked out of a medium security prison in broad daylight. No alarms, no shots fired, no resistance. Some guards were reportedly overpowered and gagged. Others simply looked the other way. The truth likely includes both. The 2 buses filled up quickly. When they left, they carried most of the fugitives. Others escaped in smaller vehicles that arrived later. Some fled on foot. The alarm was triggered at 3:21 p.m., 1 hour and 6 minutes later. By that time, the buses were already dozens of kilometers away, disappearing into the desert roads of Coahuila. The response was massive, at least on paper. More than 5,000 police officers and soldiers were mobilized. 70 members of the Navy's Special Forces, the same ones who hunted El Chapo, were sent to the region. Helicopters patrolled the skies. Checkpoints were established on all main roads. The reward, 200,000 pesos for information on each fugitive. Approximately $15,000 per person. American authorities at Eagle Pass were alerted. The Border Patrol increased surveillance. The possibility of fugitives crossing into Texas was real, but the Zetas knew the terrain. They had informants everywhere. Local police, federal police, even military police. Every movement of the security forces was tracked and reported. Hours after the escape, a shootout broke out 160 kilometers south of Piedras Negras. Police officers searching for fugitives were ambushed with grenades and automatic rifles. 4 attackers were killed. It is believed they were Zetas covering the retreat. The prison director, Miguel Angel Resendiz, was immediately dismissed and detained. 16 guards were arrested for questioning. In the following days, 3 escapees were found hiding in the prison's visiting area. They hadn't actually escaped. They had simply hidden during the chaos. The official number has dropped to 129. But the question remained, how do 131 prisoners simply disappear from a state facility? The answer was obvious to anyone who paid attention. The prison has never been under state control. In the early days, the official narrative focused on the tunnel. Images have been released. The hole in the carpentry workshop wall, the dark 7-meter corridor, the exit next to the tower, the cut fence. It was a story that made sense. Resourceful prisoners dug an escape route. Incompetent guards didn't understand it. A security failure, yes, but an explainable one. Except that it didn't explain anything. How could 131 men have passed through a tunnel 1 meter and 20 centimeters in diameter in 15 minutes? Mathematically impossible. It would have taken seconds for each one. No pushing, no traffic jams, no panic. And what about the guards who were overpowered? If there was a fight, why didn't anyone hear anything? Why wasn't any alarm triggered? And the buses? Who positioned them? Who drove them? How did they know exactly where and when to be? The truth leaked out little by little. 3 recaptured escapees confirmed what investigators already suspected. Most of the prisoners did not use the tunnel. They exited through the main gate. The guards opened it. The Public Security Secretary of Coahuila, Jorge Luis Moran Delgado, admitted in an interview, "Not all the prisoners escaped through the tunnel. The tunnel existed, it was used, but it was a detail, not the main story. The main story was that an entire prison was evacuated with the cooperation of its own staff. Of the 129 confirmed escapees, 86 were imprisoned for federal crimes, drug trafficking, aggravated homicide, kidnapping, and organized crime. These were the most dangerous. 43 were there for state crimes, robbery, theft, minor offenses. The irony was grotesque. Less dangerous criminals were dragged along with the cartel's hitmen. Some had no choice. To refuse meant death. In the following months, some fugitives were recaptured. Others turned up dead in clashes with authorities or other cartels. Most were never found. Those who survived were likely absorbed into the ranks of the Zetas, sent to Tamaulipas to fight against the Gulf Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel. Many died in battles that were never recorded. The Mexican penal system has gained another statistic, yet another mass escape, the second largest in the country's history. But for the families of the missing, for those whose relatives were burned in the diesel drums, the statistics meant nothing. The Piedras Negras prison was just another wound in a state already covered in scars. The investigations that followed revealed the extent of the corruption. In 2016, prosecutors in Coahuila announced that they had identified at least 150 victims murdered inside the prison. Arrest warrants were issued for 5 former inmates allegedly involved. Some were still behind bars. Others had disappeared. A report of over 1,500 pages, produced by the Colegio de Mexico and the Universidad Iberoamericana, documented in detail how the Zetas operated. In 2017, the International Federation for Human Rights and more than 100 Mexican organizations sent a communication to the International Criminal Court. The accusation: crimes against humanity committed in Coahuila between 2009 and 2016. The communication specifically mentioned the Piedras Negras prison, the executions, the disappearances, the complicity of the state. The governor during the most critical period, Humberto Morera, was arrested in Spain in 2016 for money laundering. Accusations of links to the Zetas had haunted him for years. He was released, but his political career was destroyed. His brother Ruben, who took over the government later, was never formally charged. But the questions remained. How was it possible that the state didn't know? How was it possible that no one acted? The most likely answer was the simplest one. They knew. They didn't act because they couldn't, or they didn't want to. In a state where the cartel controlled the municipal police, infiltrated the state police, and had informants in the army, fighting back was suicide. The safest option was to pretend nothing was happening. And that's exactly what they did. The Piedras Negras prison break took place in September 2012. A month later, Heriberto Lacano, alias Zex3, was killed by the Mexican Navy in Coahuila. His body was stolen by an armed commando before an autopsy could be performed. To this day, some question whether he actually died. In July 2013, Miguel Treviño Morales, aka Z40, was captured. In March 2015, his brother Omar, aka Z42, was also taken down. Without centralized leadership, Los Zetas fragmented. The Cartel del Noreste rose from the ashes, controlling Nuevo Laredo. The Zetas Vieja Escuela tried to maintain the original brand. Dozens of smaller factions sprouted, fighting for ever smaller territories. The cartel that once controlled 11 Mexican states operated from Guatemala to Europe and had connections in West Africa and Colombia, has become a shadow. But the violence didn't decrease, it just dispersed. And what about Piedras Negras prison? It's still operating. Reforms have been promised. New guards have been hired. Security protocols have been implemented. Nobody knows if they are enough. Nobody knows if anything would be enough. In 2011, Mexico's National Human Rights Commission published a devastating report. 60% of the country's prisons were under the control of criminal organizations, not influenced, controlled. Piedras Negras was not an exception. It was an extreme example of the rule. When the state abandons its institutions, others fill the void. When guards earn $300 a month to watch over murderers who move millions, corruption is not a possibility, it's a certainty. The 31 soldiers who deserted from GAIF in 1997 were trained by the best. They learned to kill with precision, to plan complex operations, to create intelligence networks. They used all of this to build an empire of terror. Piedras Negras prison was just one piece of that empire, a cog in a death machine that consumed thousands of lives. 131 men fled that day in September. Some were monsters. Others were victims swept away by circumstances. Some are probably still alive, hiding somewhere in Mexico or the United States. But the real fugitives were never behind bars. The governors who turned a blind eye, the generals who accepted bribes, the police officers who obeyed the wrong bosses, the politicians who financed their campaigns with blood-stained money. These people were never arrested, and they probably never will be. Piedras Negras is less than 2 kilometers from the American border. On the other side, Eagle Pass, Texas. Cars cross daily. Families visit relatives. Students come and go. 2 realities separated by a river. On one side, normality. On the other side, the abyss. And the abyss sometimes stares back.